Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA North Week number 1 overview and analysis video in the summer split. It's pick and play time in North America as we get our first kind of glimpse of some of these new look rosters. There were quite a few changes, much more than we normally see going in to a summer split across this kind of off season, and I'm excited to see how it ends up going. This is a pretty tense format, all things considered, with so much being on the line, later on, and obviously not as much being on the line at the start here, but it's still nice to be able to establish priority and establish pressure in these early weeks, even if the matchups are a bit more predictable. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. First off, go ahead and check out the primer video that we did for the beginning of the split if you haven't already. Obviously, we go over all 8 teams, my expectations, we rank the teams, we rank the players, we do all the primer stuff. You know how it goes. If you've seen it, let me know how you think it's aging so far down in the comments. It's only been one series, and so obviously not a ton to go off of, but if you haven't checked that out, I recommend it. Not essential viewing, but certainly something I would recommend in terms of making things a bit easier. But what we're going to be doing today is going series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. I guess we'll be looking at the standings and updating the power rankings at the end of the week, because we always do that, but you guys already know, one best of 3 for each of these teams is not enough to, really draw any sort of substantial conclusions. A best of 3 can be whatever. Anybody can win 2 games against any other team on any given day if anything happens, right? Like, there's so many variables that go into 3 games of League of Legends. So we'll try our best to talk about it, but most of today will be spent talking about the games themselves. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our first series of the split. And I know it's not the most exciting first series of the split, but it's the defending champions taking on the team that finished last place in the spring split. It's FlyQuest taking on Disguised, and FlyQuest is going to be able to pick up the 2-0 victory. No real major surprise here. In fact, both of these games were rather boring and rather slow, just in terms of how things went. FlyQuest never looked like they were in any sort of danger. Every play Disguised went for, even in an aggressive manner, ended up kind of backfiring on them. It just was not a very good series overall, very much mismatched between these two rosters. But we can go ahead and talk about just some of the interesting things to take away from it. First and foremost, I think the biggest takeaway and the most interesting thing to talk about when it comes to this series in particular is Gakgos coming into the top lane for game number 2. Now, Bwipo still did play game number 1, but Fly's been pretty vocal about wanting to have a 6-man roster. I think they looked at what teams like CFO and GAM had been doing over in the LCP and saw like, oh wow, actually in these big best of 5s where you're playing a lot of games, if you have 2 players in the same role with very different champion pools, you can kind of take advantage of the Fearless format and be able to save a lot of your best picks for later on in the draft phase, which is absolutely true. That is something that can be very successful. We've seen it specifically for the Oysters be something that really works out for them. They brought in a very, very young Turkish top laner in Gakgos to be that player for them, because they have that extra import slot open with Inspired getting, regionalized, I guess, and, obviously Bwipo taking up the other one with Quad, so they have that ability to play him in the top lane, and he's 17 years old, and clearly they see something pretty massive in him as a top lane player. I'm excited to see if he gets more runway. He had his own problems in game number 2. I'm certainly not going to pretend like he was perfect. In fact, he played a lot like Bwipo does on Rumble in game number 2, which is not always the best thing in the world, but the team was more than good enough around him to be able to kind of push that forward, specifically the bot lane, which was absolutely incredible in this series. Masu is the obvious choice for player of the series, specifically that Ezreal game in game number 2, but he was awesome on Varus in game number 1 as well. Just one of those games where it's like, oh wow, Masu's just better than everyone on Disguised, and it's not particularly close. I like Rahel, and I think that there is a chance that he could come in and stabilize this bot lane into being top 6 or top, 7, like not bottom 1, I guess is the point I'm trying to make, like they've been for a majority of this year. But Masu and Busio are on a different level. Busio is somebody who I've really sung the praises of throughout all of 2025 so far. I've talked about how he's the best support in the league, and he's really transcended into being that. And Masu is starting to find his form again as well. This happened last year where his spring was okay. It was his first ever split with FlyQuest, and you were kind of giving him some grace as a rookie to be able to learn and grow, but he got much better going into summer. If that's going to continue to be a trend for him, that's actually a big positive for me when it comes to FlyQuest, because if he's going to ramp up as the year goes along, you can pretty reliably count on this team being able to step up when it matters the most. So Credit to Masu. Sometimes I criticize him for not being aggressive enough in the early laning phases and just being more of a team fight bot because he is so good in those team fights, but this was a game where he clearly just trusted himself to be able to fight whenever he wanted, and yeah, he came out on top. It wasn't particularly close. Busio was also fantastic. Huhi was terrible on the other side. We'll talk about this. Every engage that Disguised ended up going for felt like a bad one, and it felt like it was poorly timed and poorly executed, and just like the macro in general of DSG was horrendous, and Busio was more than willing to capitalize and take advantage of that. I think specifically in game number 1 on the Rakan, where it really felt like he was given the keys to unlock a bit of the rest of the map. Obviously on Braum, you're much more waiting for Ezreal to be that aggressive piece and kind of setting him up to do that, whereas on the Rakan, you can be the playmaker in terms of how things end up going. So I liked Busio a bit more in that respect, but he was just really good, and he continues to be the best support in North America. There is a lot of competition for that right now. I think Vulcan's in great form. I think Core JJ's in great form, and so for Busio to be at the top of that list is obviously really, really impressive. Quad and Inspired, I thought played really well. XU, we'll talk about, just got completely jungle gapped in this series. It was not particularly close, but it's Inspired going into XU. You're not crazy surprised by that outcome. In fact, you shouldn't be surprised at all by, Inspired just being the best jungler in North America. He went to MSI and was gapping, Eastern junglers, and so you're not freaking out that Inspired is incredibly good domestically. The Xin Zhao was awesome in game 1. The Maokai controlled space really well in game number 2 as well. So overall, Inspired looked great. Quad was pretty solid here. Definitely was generating advantages in the late game where he is pretty stable. I was a bit disappointed with Quad's performance internationally at MSI, but this was generally fine. Again, a lot of the attention here is going to go on how well the bot lane played, how poorly the jungle matchup went for DSG, and Gekko's coming into the top lane. Again, hopefully he is somebody that ends up being a really big positive for this team. So far, we've seen some ups and downs in the short amount of time. Again, kind of a Bwipo-esque Rumble game where he just makes some mistakes in side lanes, gets caught out a bit more than maybe you would want to see, but at the end of the day, he was good enough, and Fly was certainly winning elsewhere. We'll see how that 6-man ends up going. But for Disguised on the other side, I mean, they're going up against FlyQuest, so how much do you even really want to take away from a series like this? Like, do you want to put a ton of stock into them getting blasted in a couple of key areas, or are you just willing to go, well, it's Fly, who really cares? Because those are kind of the two big, I guess, takeaways here. XU and Huhi were terrible, like just absolutely unplayable in terms of how this matchup went. XU completely gapped in the jungle. The Wukong, the Sejuani, all of it looked terrible. I would say specifically the Sejuani in game 2, he looked unplayable, really, and, I've been a bit lower on XU in terms of what he's been this year. I do think he's a bit more limited as a player in terms of his skill set. He relies a lot on pushing lanes so that he can play aggressive in the mid game. He doesn't have those right now, and that's really ended up impacting him, but Huhi is actually going to get my dud of the series because I think his problems were much more intentional than XU's were, because a lot of Huhi's biggest mistakes were just going way too deep. I mean, the play in game 1 down in the bot lane on the Alistar is the obvious one, but he had plays like this throughout the entirety of the series where it's just like, what are you thinking, man? Like, what kind of play are you even looking for here? You're diving down onto, members. You're engaging down 5k gold and instantly dying as Rel. Like, it just felt really weird. He felt completely disconnected from the rest of the team. I understand that it's going to take some time for them to get their communication under them with Rahel coming in. I assume he speaks good English because he's been on SK Gaming and, been playing in Europe, but I don't know what the communication pattern looks like for Disguise. Darkwings is obviously somebody that has never played at a tier 1 level before. You're hoping to get him up to speed as quickly as possible. Like, there are a lot of question marks about whether or not this team not only is going to be able to execute, but whether or not they're going to be on the same page early on in the split, and very much did not pass that test, at least in the first series here. And Huhi, I think, was the most egregious example of that. The only positives I can take away, Darkwings was generally okay. He actually had a couple of positive moments, I would say, for DSG. It just didn't really end up mattering. Rahel wasn't the worst, although he certainly wasn't the best. He just wasn't making egregious mistakes. He was watching his teammates die around him and going like, well, what do I do here? Only so much you can do on AD carry. Castle was whatever. He was better on the Jax in game 2 than he was on the Sion in game 1, but he's also going into a worse player in game 2, so kind of is what it is. Disguised has pieces I think it can build around, but we all expected this outcome, and for Fly, no one's surprised by this either. This is what we all anticipated, and it's good to see the defending champions who did really well at MSI back that up right now. Then moving on to our second series and our second of day number 1, and we have the number 2 team also getting their predictable win. Cloud9 beating up on LYON, and obviously I wish I could be a little bit more graceful about how I talk about this series, but once again, it just wasn't close. Both games are sub 30 minutes. Neither of them felt like they were ever going to be back and forth. This just was a destruction from Cloud9 against a team they absolutely should be better than. I know that there still are some LYON defenders out there, some believers, but especially with Yayo coming in to the top lane as a replacement replacement for Zamudo, who is failing to get a work visa right now. You know, it's a problem for LYON. They just don't have the talent elsewhere. And as much as I'd love to sit here and be like, oh, they didn't have a good top laner, so the entire game was unplayable, he was not the problem in game number 2. I'm going to be entirely frank with you. He was terrible. He got mega gapped. It was not remotely close. He was not the only one on this team who looked to just completely outclassed in every single area. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Player of the series is really up to your own personal interpretation. I want to give it to Thanatos because of just how dominant he was on the top side of the map. If you want to give it to Loki, if you want to give it to Sven, if you want to give it to Vulcan, hell, even Blabber I thought was really, really good in this series. It does not matter. All 5 members of these, all 5 members of Cloud9, all 5 members on the team ended up absolutely battering LYON, and so whoever you think had the biggest impact, I think is fair to say. I don't think this was one player carrying them across the finish line, but Thanatos, I think, was the most direct in terms of the way that he ended up dominating the game. The Rumble in game 1 that he gets on the counterpick, the Renekton in game 2 that LYON was quite scared of, you know, for obvious reasons. This is just, he's the best top laner in the league in terms of his raw mechanics, and he's going up against, all due respect to Yayo, and we'll talk about him, like, this is a, you know, mid-table to lower mid-table tier 3 top laner, and so, yeah, this went as expected, right? Like, Thanatos absolutely obliterated him. You know, he wasn't particularly useful in the back half of the game, Yayo, that is, and Thanatos was entirely useful in both of these games. It just, like, I wish I could give you more of a detailed breakdown, but, like, what do you want me to tell you? That Thanatos beat up on a player that shouldn't be in the LTA? Because that's just kind of what it is. I don't blame Yayo. He got a shot and he took it and obviously kind of got obliterated, but this was putting somebody in to get obliterated by Thanatos. Like, that was the whole point of this series. So it is what it is. Thanatos looked incredible, but I do want to give a big shout out to the rest of this team. There are still a lot of people out there that want to make the argument that Saint is better than Loki. I don't really know what else to tell you, man. I get that this game was a bit of a disaster. This series was a bit of a disaster for LYON, and that there weren't going to be a lot of opportunities for Saint to really express himself and kind of show whether or not he's better, but Loki completely gapped him in the 1v1. Like, this was not particularly close. He was much better in this series than Saint was, and, you know, I've been saying for a little while that Loki is clearly a more comfortable player right now than Saint is playing in the league. I think Loki has more options in terms of the way that he plays the game. I think he's more versatile as a player playstyle-wise, whereas Saint, I think, kind of needs to be the carry, or else he's not going to be nearly as useful. It's why the draft in game 2 ended up falling flat so hard. You can't play through Henna if you're LYON. It's just not going to work. You kind of have to play through Saint. And I think Loki ended up proving that. 21-20 across these 2 games is actually just ridiculous. I mean, it's a truly unreal scoreline. Sven and Vulcan mega gapped the bot lane on the other side here for LYON. They were unbelievably better. Sven was mispositioning like crazy on the Senna, stepping up way too far forward, and it did not matter. Like, there was never a chance where that was ever going to be punishable. I honestly am not even criticizing Sven for it, because at that point in the game, he's just like, well, I can't die. Like, it's actually impossible for me to ever perish. I have my shields, I have Orianna shields, I have so much peel with Rel, Renekton, Skarner. Like, there's never a point in the game where Sven's ever going to be in danger, but Vulcan's engages were tremendous. LYON's was terrible on the other side, constantly running it down and getting caught out over and over again. Vulcan, at the very least, was capitalizing on a lot of those misplays coming in from LYON's and from LYON in general, so credit to them. Blabber was also very good. Like, I don't want to make it seem like Blabber was bad in any way, shape, or form. He was just as connected to the rest of this game as anybody else was. I just don't think he had the flashy highlight plays that everybody else did. So Cloud9 decimating LYON, quite a boring day number 1 of the split, if we're being honest. And then for LYON on the other side, I'm barely going to talk about Yayo on the top side, because what do you even want me to say? Like, he got obliterated on Sion, and then his Gragas was terrible. He hit some ultimates on the Senna. None of them ended up mattering. I don't know how comfortable he was in the champion, because he wasn't comboing any of his abilities all that well, like Yayo as a player. And by the way, if you don't know who Yayo is, I should probably go into that. It's probably worth at least giving some sort of explanation. This is a player that we've covered on the channel before in the NACL, formerly Bajani, who's played for quite a lot of teams in the past in Tier 2 and in Tier 3. He's only been in Tier 2 the one time, but he's been a Tier 3 player for quite a long time. He's not exactly been a successful Tier 3 player. He's never been particularly close to re-qualifying for Tier 2 in any large capacity, but like I said, he is starting for Zamudo, who was called up and acquired as LYON's new top laner in the offseason, but Zamudo is having major visa issues right now. You know, not an uncommon problem in terms of visas going through esports at the current moment. But Yayo was the one kind of filling in for that situation. He was never expected to do super well. He's not playing next week. It's already been announced that Surdy has been picked up and will be kind of the LYON top laner to be determined until moving forward, maybe even just full time. I would have assumed that was the move they were going to make in the offseason anyways, but we'll see what ends up happening there. But as much as he was the problem, and as terrible as he was, and as much as he got blasted by Thanatos, I can't blame him for this loss. Not only is he not a player that should be in the LTA, just in general, has not had the success. He's not even a tier 2 player, right? It's not even like you're calling up somebody like, you know, what Shopify did with Zazel last split, where you feel comfortable he can play at this level. This is somebody who has barely any tier 2 experience. The one time he did play in tier 2, he was on the worst team in the entire league. They couldn't win any games, and they were just getting blasted. Like, that's the kind of player they called up, and the rest of the team had to play around it, and they couldn't, and they kind of ran it down in their respect as well. Lions was terrible in this series. I think he was more egregious in terms of the mistakes, not only because he's supposed to be a tier 1 player, like you're supposed to expect him to do well, but also because I think in game 2, he genuinely just was worse on the Braum. Like, I don't even think you can say that Yayo was the worst player in that game. He was so terrible. Lions has always been someone that I've been pretty out on, and one of the big reasons why I don't believe in LYON as a team that can compete around top 5 is because I don't think Lions is good enough. I don't think Odilan has proven himself to be good enough, and I think that was kind of clear in this series. When Saint's getting blasted in the mid lane, this team is absolutely doomed. Like, there's no way for them to be able to play because he is their only win condition, and the only times they ever won last split was when he was able to win. When this team underperformed and ended up missing playoffs and shocked everybody, it's because Saint really let the team down and started really playing bad down the stretch. If he continues to be a negative for this team in the mid lane, like, they're cooked. They might be number 8 in terms of the power rankings if Saint is going to be, you know, not very good. But we'll see what happens with the top lane situation. Again, it looks like Surdy will be playing for week 2, which is definitely an upgrade over Yayo, but we'll see if that can make a difference. And for Cloud9, obviously they decimated LYON. This is, until proven otherwise, the second best team in the LTA, and you know, maybe not the most entertaining of games here on day number 1, but at the very least we saw our 2 best teams play well, and that's encouraging. Moving on to game number 3, or series number 3, to kick off day number 2 here. And if you thought the competitive series were going to be coming on day 2, here is your sign that maybe it's not quite that simple. It's Team Liquid taking on 100 Thieves, and Team Liquid decimates this series, even more so than I think the scoreline would indicate. This was one of those, like, it's only being dragged out because Team Liquid is taking too long to end the game types of series where, you know, 100 Thieves really had nothing going for them at any point. There were a couple of okay performances. I think River was pretty good in this series. Quid and Sniper weren't the biggest problems in this series. The bot lane was truly horrific from 100 Thieves, though, which we will talk about. And for Team Liquid, it's basically the opposite story. You're looking at a jungle mid duo that was good, but weren't necessarily main characters in this series, and then a top lane that looked awesome. We'll talk about Impact, and a bot lane that I really want to highlight. And we'll kick off with that now, because player of the series is very obviously going to LYON. I think the only other candidates here would be Impact and Core JJ, who I think both played really well in this series, but LYON was just clip farming. By the end of this series, it was genuinely absurd. They were not ending the game because they just wanted to get LYON more damage. It's not fair how strong he was in game number 2, and he carried that through from game number 1 on the Kai'Sa as well. It was just a masterclass from LYON. He really is Team Liquid in terms of what this identity for the roster is, and that's not to say that everybody else on this team is bad or that he's 1v9ing, or, you know, I'm not trying to say that. I don't believe that that's the case, but Team Liquid at their best, when they're going to be a team that tries to compete to win the league and tries to push for number 1, they're going to be the kind of team that relies on LYON being the best player in the league. Like, he is the core identity of their playstyle, and he kind of showed that off here. He picks Kai'Sa and goes into Lucian, ends up dominating the laning phase because it's just what happens with LYON. He wins lane 2v2. You can print it. Like, no matter the matchup, no matter the circumstance, he's just going to do that. And then obviously, he decimates game number 2 on the Ezreal. I think we all saw that coming after how game 1 went. He's just so talented. If he's going to step up again and just be that guy for Team Liquid, like, he can still be, and probably still is, the best player in the entire region from a pure raw talent standpoint. You know, maybe outside of Inspired, you know, it's those two, 1A, 1B. I think Quid is somewhere in that conversation, but he certainly didn't show it in this series. And, you know, like, that's how far ahead I think LYON can be, and that's Team Liquid's identity, I think, in a nutshell. Core JJ was incredible, though. Just another one of those series where it's clear that he is just everywhere he needs to be at any given time. When Core has to play from ahead, his macro is completely unbeatable. Like, it's just one of those, you know, you can't give him a lead. You can't give Team Liquid an advantage because he's going to make the right decisions almost 100% of the time. I've been questioning his neutral decisions for the past year or so because I think they have gotten a bit more inconsistent in that regard, but man, you give Team Liquid a lead, they are going to decimate a game like that because of Core, and he's also obviously great as an engaged threat on Rel and on Alistar as well. He's gotten much better in the 2v2, and they decimated FBI and Ayla. Impact was awesome in this series. Where has this guy been all year long? I have been hoping and praying for an Impact turnaround because I was super critical of him in winter. He was the single worst player at the First Stand International Tournament earlier this year. I don't even think it's really all that close in terms of that kind of argument. Maybe Umti, maybe Vladi. Like, those are the kinds of players that you're putting in that same conversation. Like, yeah, Impact was pretty darn bad, you know, in terms of how things went. And then in the spring split, he was trying his best to hold this team back. He was one of the biggest reasons why they weren't competitive in the top two, why they ended up getting fourth. I'm not saying he's the only reason, but did he get completely outplayed by Fudge in the playoff series? Absolutely he did, and that was a big problem for Team Liquid. So to see him bounce back and at least look good against a player in Sniper who I think is making good developments on the other side, it's a good sign for Impact that hopefully he can turn things around going into summer. UG and APA were solid. UG in particular was everywhere on the map. APA didn't really have to do all that much, but again, neither of them were necessarily the main characters. I was hoping to come into a series like this and get to talk about UG a little bit more, but no, that's not the case. Team Liquid's bot lane and their top lane really wanted to take the spotlight, and that's exactly what they did. Then for 100 Thieves on the other side, you know, maybe this team isn't top four. Like, maybe I was wrong about that, because this bot lane was absolutely horrific in this series. I mean, truly unplayable. FBI is getting dead of the series, not because he was worse in game two, because I want to make it clear, Ayla's game two, terrible on the Nautilus. Like, there is no acceptable way to talk about his game two where he was constantly landing hooks and going in over and over again. It reminded me of it reminded me of Kaiwing, quite frankly, at the MSI tournament, where it's just like, you gotta stop pressing Q, man. It's going to continue to cost your team a lot of pressure. But the difference, I think, is that FBI was also terrible in game one, or at least more terrible than Ayla in game one, and he was also terrible in game two, so he's the one who gets done of the series for me. FBI's fall off from winter has to be studied, because I'm a big FBI defender. I've been somebody who's been hyping him up for years. I don't think he's ever really been nearly as bad as people have made him out to be. This is the worst he's ever been, and it's not particularly close. The gameplay that we've seen from him over the past month and a half to 2 months is completely unacceptable, and maybe the haters were right. You know, I was a defender of him when he came over to 100 Thieves, you know, again, and even the first time when he came over, and even when he was signed by Energy, and obviously all of those stops ended up working, but man, this just looks terrible. Like, again, I've never seen him play this bad in and out of lane. I think bot lane talent in North America is better than it has been in a very long time, and it's clear that FBI just might not be able to keep up with the top tier players at this level, and Ayla obviously is not an A+ kind of support. He's not a player who's ever going to be considered an elite tier guy. I think he can be your standard B or B- caliber support at this level, be stable and average and, you know, solid enough, but like, it's clear that there's always going to be a bit of a gap between the good supports and Ayla, which I think is a bit disappointing. Everybody else was fine. Sniper got beat on the top side, but I wouldn't say it was entirely his fault. River and Quid were the strong side of this team, as they always are. River in particular was able to at least pull some gold back, but at the end of the day, like, if bot lane's gonna get slaughtered, and if you're gonna have a Fed like LYON on Kai'Sa and LYON on Ezreal on the other side, it's kind of doomed no matter what, and even Impact was starting to get in on the party towards the end of this series. So 100 Thieves kind of looked doomed, and they did not look top four here, and Team Liquid looked great. Really happy to have put them in the top three, and hopefully they're going to continue to live up to their own hype. But then moving on to our fourth and final series of the week, and yet again, another 2-0, 8 games this week, not a single game number 3. Shopify Rebellion taking on Dignitas, and Shopify Rebellion taking the 2-0 win, although I will give Dig credit. Amongst all of the teams that ended up getting blasted this week, they were the ones who put up by far the biggest fight. Quite frankly, there is no excuse for them losing game 2 in the way that they did. They are in a decent position. They're around Otacon. It feels like the game is theirs. They have they've got Smite, they've got Callista Rend, they've got so many ways to secure this objective, and yet somehow they screw it up. They fail to execute the combo correctly, and Shopify Rebellion are able to get in. Not Contracts getting in, by the way, to steal it on the Jarvan. A tick from Palafox's ultimate on Victor ends up stealing the Otacon away, and from that point, Dig is so mental boomed, it's actually just insane. Like, there's no way for them to play that game from a mental perspective. Kana ends up running it down actively at the end of that game on Galio, and it just ends up turning into a disaster. Obviously, we will talk about it more as we continue to go along, but let's start with the Shopify Rebellion side of this. They played game 1 great. They played game 2 in a place where they probably should have been a lot further behind than they actually were, but the big positive, and kind of as a week for this position, is B-Voy in the AD carry role really stepping up and playing great. He's going to get player of the series. Kind of the week of AD carries, at least at the kickoff here. It felt like ADC was constantly the position we were highlighting the most throughout week number 1. Definitely a positive for the league. I've been talking a lot about flat-out AD carry is actually very good in North America right now. It's a position that I think has a ton of talent. Even Tomo, who I think is the weakest AD carry in the league, has a big advantage to him, and that's that he's really good in lane. And so you end up having this ecosystem where all of the AD carries keep getting better, and I think that's what we really like about the recent showings from a lot of these players. And B-Boy, to me, really encapsulated that in terms of his performance in this series. Like I said, the Lucian in Game 1, pretty good, but it really was the dominant performance in teamfights on the Ezreal in Game 2 that separated him. Ezreal was a big champion for him for a long time, and a lot of the other regions he played for. I specifically remember that being the case when he was playing for Misfits many years ago, where he really was this, like, Ezreal player. Like, that's kind of what you locked in on when it came to B-Boy individually. So it's cool to see him still be able to pilot that at a high level in these big, kind of drawn-out exchanges, but exciting to see B-Boy step up, because during their playoff run, when this team figured everything out, when the vibes got a ton better, when Palafox and Fudge ended up coming online in terms of how they were playing the game, it was B-Boy that I was still questioning the most in terms of his production and in terms of the way he was playing. If he is going to step up and actually just be a positive for this team, that's ginormous for Shopify, and that does put them into that top 3 conversation once again, because bot lane was one of my bigger concerns. Not my only one, because Palafox and Fudge still need to be good, but they were in this series, and if B-Boy's going to step up and be, you know, a top 4 AD carry, which I think is reasonable. Top 3 is not reasonable. They are very much locked in terms of who those players are, but top 4 is reachable. If B-Boy can get there, that's ginormous. And Seos, I think, was a part of that as well. I've always been a huge fan of Seos, even going back to his time, you know, before he entered North America. In fact, I would glaze this guy every single year when we did Worlds coverage on this channel, because I'm just like, please, some major region, pick this guy up. He's way too good playing in Brazil, and obviously he ends up coming over here to North America. It took him some time to get comfortable, but I think he's gotten a lot better in his small amount of time. Palafox was great in this series. Contracts was super aggressive, as he always is when he plays a lot of these more skirmish heavy engaged tanks like Jarvan, like Xin Zhao in a series like this. Fudge was solid on the top side, although I will say Photon was very good in lane. Like, when you're talking about the 1v1, Photon was as advertised in terms of that, where he really was able to generate a gigantic lead. It's just that Fudge was more useful, I would say, in the team fights where Photon really struggled. So credit to Shopify, kind of playing the game I expected them to play, but still nice to see them do it. And then for Dig, at least they put up a little bit of a fight, which is something the other 3 losing teams this week did not do. So there's that at the very least, but they are not a team that has the wherewithal, we'll just say, to go toe-to-toe, even with a Shopify Rebellion team that I think is beatable. Tomo's going to get done of the series for me, which feels really unfortunate, but quite frankly, that misplay at Otacon completely cost them game number 2, like, single-handedly. If you're not familiar, if you didn't watch the game, if you don't know how it went down, obviously, you know, Rend plus Smite should be a free secure on any objective in the entire game. There's absolutely nothing that can really do that, but Tomo ends up rending early. He rends, I believe, from, like, 2.5k, and it gets to about, like, 1200 and like 70 like HP, something like that, where it's just a little bit off, which means Shaden has to wait a second auto another time, and he still ends up smiting early, I believe at 1223, and that ends up getting it down to 23 HP, with which the Victor ult ends up proccing and taking the Otacon. It's something that should never happen. There's no reason for Tomo to ever rend early. Like, it's you would much rather just rend 100 HP late than 100 HP early on the Callista, because even with that happening, as long as you're communicating with your jungle, it's still not a flip. It's still not a 50-50 in that regard, so it's a complete disaster from Tomo. I think some of the fights he was okay in, like, he was able to generate some gold individually, but outside of that, it really was a disaster, and that was a back-breaking play. I think the other player to criticize here is actually Photon in the top lane, because it's just weird. Like, he's always been a bit of a player that's like this, but I think this was a more exaggerated version of what we've seen in the past. It's funny because, you know, Rich is a top laner that this team had imported previously. I think Photon and Rich might be the exact opposite player, which is very funny, but Photon dominated lane, was really good at being able to generate a lead for himself in the 1v1 wherever he was on the map, and then just kind of looked lost in team fights in terms of being able to play the map. That always was a slight problem for him, although I think it was overblown in the LEC how much that was an issue. I think he still was very valuable in team fights. He just wasn't top 1 in team fights like he was in laning for a lot of the stats, but he was not very good in this game on the Aurora in game 2. He definitely needed to do more. Kano was in a great spot to actually play this out. He was the best player on the team in terms of production, and then they throw away Otacon and he completely mental booms. Same thing for Shaden, although that's less surprising just in terms of his history as well. So for Dig, like, you want to give them credit for being competitive in a game, in a series against Shopify Rebellion, but they only lost because of their own problems and their own mistakes, and hopefully they can grow and evolve out of that, but at least for now, it doesn't make me feel better about Dig's chances moving forward. And for Shopify Rebellion, you know, I'm glad to see them pick up a win. Maybe you don't want to be the only upper tier team that actually struggles in week number 1, but at the end of the day, like, the other teams got incredibly easy matchups, and clearly Shopify Shopify is probably top 4. Maybe I just underestimated this team. It's hard to really pull things away from one best of 3, but with everything being a 2-0, Shopify at the very least was able to keep that streak alive, I guess you could say, keep that 2-0 mojo going here in the LTA North, and we'll see just how long, unfortunately, that might last with this format. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA North Week number 1 overview and analysis video here in the summer split. Up on the screen, the Week 1 standings, and honestly, not really anything to talk about here. We've got 4 teams tied for first at 1-0. We've got 5 teams tied for, I guess 4 teams tied for 5th is what I meant to say, at 0-1. They all won 2-0 or all lost 0-2, so it didn't really matter. Like, there's no real major things to talk about here. The only thing that's worth noting is I do have my power rankings on the right of every single team. Change would be how they have changed from last week to this week, but only one change to make because everything went according to plan. Shopify will be moving up into the top 4. 100 Thieves just look too bad for me to feel comfortable about them, staying in number 4, so they're going to move down to number 5. I still think it's reasonable to understand or to expect 100 Thieves to be a team that could compete with Shopify, if not be better than them, but FBI and Ayla being so terrible in their matchup against Team Liquid did give me some reservation, and even if Shopify could have been a bit more clinical in terms of their own execution, I do think that they were good enough to take that number 4 spot. So, just kind of standard stuff. Top 4 teams won, bottom 4 teams lost. And with this pick and play format, I have a hard time believing that it's going to be any different moving forward. I believe it's likely going to be 4 2-0 starts and 4 0-2 starts. And that just is what it is. This format is absolutely horrendous, at least in the first stage. We'll see if they end up changing it. But let me know if you agree or disagree with my takes down in the comment section below. And then let's go ahead and get into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 1. Player of the week for me, it's going to go to LYON, the AD carry for Team Liquid. It felt like he was styling on his opposition the most. Like I said, 100 Thieves really struggled across this week, and I think LYON was the one to kind of take advantage of that the most, and so, his highlight plays end up landing him the player of the week. The Kaisa game was good, but it really was the Ezreal game that was kind of disgusting from him, and obviously we're hoping to see more of that because he is so integral towards Team Liquid's success, and if he's really good again, if he's the best player in the league again, which is not out of the realm of possibility, then they can win the league. Like, it absolutely is that kind of upside if LYON can play at this level. My honorable mentions, my runner-ups here, Masu, the AD carry for FlyQuest, and Thanatos, the top laner for Cloud9. These felt like pretty easy honorable mentions. Obviously, these were the other 2 player of the series for the 2 teams that ended up dominating their respective matchups. Masu was super consistent. Thanatos was kind of the representative to take advantage of a bad player on LYON. And so it ends up just being pretty easy to talk about. But again, with only 1 series per week for each team, it's really hard to get a full, grasp of everything. So Masu and Thanatos are the honorable mentions. And my dud of the week is going to go to LYON. So the support for LYON, he just was a disaster in that series against Cloud9. He looked completely inept, to be entirely frank, and hopefully he's going to be better. This is the worst series he's played in North America all year, and even if I've not been a fan of his gameplay and not a fan of his tape so far, it's certainly not been this bad, so you have to imagine that things are going to get a little bit better, especially because this team will be getting a real top laner coming in next week, which is a huge, huge improvement. But at least for now, in week number 1, Lions is going to get dud of the week, and LYON is going to get player of the week, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit subscribe. Of course, we'll be covering every single week of the LTA, both in this pick and play format, and then eventually when we get into the actual bracket style format and when we get into the qualification for Worlds, all of that stuff. But we cover all 3 of the other major regions as well: LEC, LCK, and LPL. I've been casting for LPL English. Links to that are in the description as per usual. You can check out any of those VODs if you are interested to see any of those live casts that I've been doing. But we also cover the NACL on this channel, Tier 2 over in North America, or I guess here in North America. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of anything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all